A very good day to all of you. Today we are going to continue the fourth part of Lesson 8 from Grade 10 Health and Physical Education Lesson Series. The lesson is about maintaining a healthy body. In this part of the lesson, we are going to talk about the respiratory system of our body. So as you all know, oxygen is an essential thing for energy production inside the body cells. During the energy production process inside the body cells, carbon dioxide is produced as a waste product. And what the respiratory system of our body does is that it helps in the transport and exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So oxygen is inhaled from the air to our lungs, then it is transported to the blood from there, and it is delivered to cells through blood. Likewise, carbon dioxide is removed from the body through exhalation. So carbon dioxide from the cells, they are transported to the blood and they come back to the lungs and they get removed from the body through exhalation of the lungs. In this slide, we are looking at the parts of the respiratory system. So it starts with the nostril, and inside it we have the nasal cavity, and below the nasal cavity there's the oral cavity, which is a separate compartment. And when we go down the nasal cavity, first we meet pharynx, then comes the larynx, and then there's the trachea. Trachea branches into the right bronchus and the left bronchus. Then the bronchus further branches into bronchioles, and the bronchioles end up in alveoli. This is the left lung, this is the right lung, and there's a diaphragm beneath the two lungs, and then there's the parietal pleura. So this is the membrane that lines the inside of the thoracic cavity. So if we start off with the nose, the nasal cavity is lined with the mucous membrane that has mucus secreting glands and cilia. So these cilia are the hair-like structures that we have in our nostrils. So the nasal cavity consists of mucous membrane and the cilia. So both these cilia and the mucus trap dust, germs, and any other foreign particles that enter the nose and prevent them from reaching the lungs. And also the nasal cavity helps in warming up the air and moistening it up inside the nose before it reaches the lungs. So those are some of the functions performed by the nose or the nasal cavity. And if we take an instance like, why do you sneeze and feel a burning sensation when inhaling chili powder? That's because chili powder contains capsaicin, which is a chemical that irritates the mucous membrane in the nose. And this irritation triggers the nerve endings we have inside our nasal cavity, and it causes a burning sensation. As a result, the body reacts by sneezing to expel the irritant. It tries to get rid of the irritant and also not let it pass down to the lungs and protect the respiratory system. So even it's a different case, whether it could be germs, dust, or any other foreign particles apart from chemicals, even like whatever the substance or particles, if it's foreign to the nasal cavity, they are going to sneeze it out. Next, let's talk about the pharynx. So the pharynx is a tube-like structure that connects the nasal and oral cavities. So here we have the nasal cavity, and down here we have the oral cavity. So this area is called the pharynx. It's also a tube-like structure. It serves as a passageway for both air. Air comes from the nasal cavity, and food, which comes from the oral cavity. And it passes down air to the trachea. Here you have the trachea, and here you have the esophagus. So this is like a common passageway for both air and food. And larynx is somewhere here. It's also known as the voice box. So it is located at the opening of the trachea. Here you see the trachea. Larynx, or your voice box, is located at the opening of your trachea, and it helps in sound production using the vocal cords. So that's why we need the voice box to speak. It helps in sound production. And there's also a protection mechanism here related to epiglottis. So this epiglottis is a flap-like structure, as you can see here. It can close the trachea and prevent food from entering the trachea. It closes the larynx actually. So the opening of the trachea is where the larynx is located. Therefore, when food is coming down through the oral cavity, it needs to be passed to the esophagus and not to the trachea. Therefore, the epiglottis, which is a flap-like structure, closes the larynx and prevents food from getting into the airway. By any case, if food accidentally enters the trachea, that is when you get the cough and you cough out that food. So that is a cough reflex. You get a cough reflex, and it helps to expel the food which tried to get in the airway, and that is how it protects the airway using the epiglottis. After the pharynx and larynx, then there's the trachea, also known as the windpipe. So the trachea is a tube which starts just below the larynx, and it runs down the chest in front of the esophagus. It's located in front of the esophagus. And this serves as the main airway that carries air to the lungs and also back from the lungs. So if we talk about the branches of the trachea, it is the trachea which branches further into two bronchi, as the right bronchi and the left bronchi, and the bronchi further branches into bronchioles, further divided into smaller bronchioles, and at the end of the bronchioles you will see alveoli. They are like tiny air sacs where gas exchange occurs. We'll talk about that in the next few slides. So those are the basic parts of the trachea, which is also known as the windpipe. Next, if we talk about the two main organs of the respiratory system, which are lungs, the right lung and the left lung. So the lungs are two spongy organs. They are located in our chest and are protected by the rib cage. So the left lung, as you can see, is slightly smaller than the right lung to make space for the heart. And if you talk about the structures inside the lungs have bronchioles, which we talked earlier, smaller branches of the bronchi that spread throughout the lungs. They also have alveoli, the tiny air sacs where oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged. And also the lungs have blood vessels which carry oxygenated and deoxygenated blood to and from the lungs. And also the lungs have lymph glands and nerves which help with the immune responses and other lung functions. Next, we are going to talk about the process of inhalation and exhalation. So inhalation means breathing in, exhalation means breathing out. So during inhalation, the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, which are the muscles between our ribs, they contract, and as a result, the chest cavity expands. So during inhalation, this diaphragm pulls down and the intercostal muscles pulls up, so the chest cavity expands, it becomes bigger, creating a low pressure inside the lungs than in the atmosphere. When the volume increases, the pressure decreases inside the chest cavity. So overall, the chest cavity has a low pressure than the outside atmospheric pressure. As a result, air flows into the lungs through the airways. And then in exhalation, the diaphragm relaxes, the intercostal muscles also relax, and as a result, you can see how the chest cavity has become smaller. Now the volume is less, the pressure is high, so there's a high pressure inside the lungs, and as a result, like compared to the atmospheric pressure, so as a result, air is pushed out of the lungs into the air. So that is simply the inhalation and the exhalation process which takes place in our lungs. In this slide, let's talk about the exchange of air in the lungs. So this happens in the alveoli, which are the tiny air sacs in the lungs. Alveoli are covered with capillaries, which are tiny blood vessels. So during our inhalation process, oxygen from the alveoli moves into the capillaries, particularly the arterial capillaries, and these arterial capillaries carry the oxygenated blood throughout the body. And during the exhalation process, carbon dioxide from the capillaries branching out from veins move from these vein capillaries to the alveoli, and that carbon dioxide containing air is exhaled back to the air through the lungs. So this is what happens during the exchange of air in the lungs, and the primary function takes place between the alveoli and the capillaries, which are located around them. Let's look at some of the diseases related to the respiratory system. Common cold and inflammation of the larynx. So these can be caused by bacteria as well as viruses, and they usually spread through infected air droplets or by direct contact with those who have been infected. It usually resolves with the body's immunity, therefore it does not need specific treatments. Bronchitis and pneumonia is another condition. It affects the lower respiratory system. So the lower respiratory system consists of the trachea, the bronchi, bronchioles, and the alveoli, which means the lungs. And these are caused by bacterial and viral infections. However, these require intensive medical care. Tuberculosis is another disease. This is caused by bacteria. It mainly affects the lungs, but it can spread to other organs of the body as well. And it can be prevented with the BCG vaccine given at birth. And if infected, it needs continuous medication as prescribed in order to be cured. So here we are looking at some of the other conditions which are associated with the respiratory system. Bronchial asthma, also known as just asthma and wheezing in layman terms. So it causes inflammation and narrowing of airways, leading to coughing and difficulty in breathing. So this often starts in childhood, and may also disappear with age, and this is usually triggered by colds, dust, and other pollutants. However, this can be managed with proper treatment. And then there's catarrh, also known as allergic rhinitis. This is an allergy affecting the inner nose. Triggers include cold drinks, dust, mosquito coils, cigarette smoke, and cold air. Then there's lung cancer. This is a serious and life-threatening disease. The main cause is often smoking. There are other risks such as burning plastic or polythene, vehicle smoke, household firewood smoke, and passive smoking. So these are like things which affect in the long run, so not just because of one incident. However, lung cancer is a serious and a life-threatening disease. So we've come to the last part of the lesson where we're going to talk about the steps to avoid respiratory diseases. So one of the things is to prevent infection spread. So avoid crowded places if you have an infection, and also cover your nose and mouth when sneezing or coughing to prevent spreading germs. And another thing is avoid smoking, because smoking damages the lungs and increases the risk of respiratory diseases like bronchitis, asthma, and lung cancer. Manage allergies. Avoid foods that trigger allergic reactions, as allergies can cause breathing difficulties. Not only food, if there are any other pollutants or any other triggers which can bring up one's allergic reactions, it's better to try and avoid them. Breathe clean air. Stay away from polluted environments and ensure proper ventilation at home. Use a mask. Wear a mask in polluted areas or even if you have a contagious respiratory disease. Seek medical advice. If you have a persistent cough or unexplained weight loss, you have to consult a doctor, because that may be symptoms of not only something that could be lightly taken, so it could be symptoms of some serious respiratory disease. So make sure that you seek medical advice. So that brings us to the end of the lesson. Thank you very much for listening. There's just one more part of the lesson remaining. So subscribe to the channel to stay tuned for more lessons. See you next time.